Hello, it's me again, Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, fractalu.com, phi-ray.com. We're here in a special edition to talk about the key to successful dream time and death, which is to understand clearly for yourself that time is only fractal spin rate compression. You know, it really kind of bothers me that physics has made such a mess of the description of what time is, making it some kind of mystery, like when Einstein said space-time is bent. Well, how are you supposed to figure that out practically? And if you can't figure that out practically, actually, my conclusion is you ain't gonna die well. I mean that the way through death is specifically, and the way into the lucid dream, is specifically understanding the kind of compression that enables spin rate to be centripetally concentrated. And that experience of spin rate only is the only definition of time. Here's a very practical example, so you don't have to get caught up all this crap from conventional physics. It's, oh, well, we bent space-time. Bending space-time is a crappy language intended to confuse and disempower people instead of understanding that actually you too can go through death very nicely if you happen to understand what time is. So that's what the theme of this conversation is. So starting very practically, if you can visualize all of matter as essentially a donut made of charge, plasma, toroid, lots of names for these things. But the essential point is that when a donut made of charge is accelerated, for example, you took your watch and accelerated it close to the speed of light in orbit. Well, obviously that watch is going to change time. But that's not a mystery. No, it's very simple to understand that as you accelerate this torus, which represents all of mass, rotating charge is called mass. So charge is rotating toroidally, we call that mass. Very simple. The rate of that rotation we call time. So when you accelerate mass, your wristwatch in orbit, as it were, and it goes really fast, what happens is you can think of it as the ether wind. The ether wind is real. Ether is a superfluid named charge. That's what it is. And in that ether wind, a sum of that inertia of acceleration of your wristwatch traveling in space, or you being time shifted, is simply that there is a conversion, translation of vorticity of the inertia of that acceleration, some of the inertia of that acceleration due to the ether wind, as it were, the environment, the ambiance, the fractal array of charge. So because it's being accelerated, some of the inertia of that acceleration as you speed up your wristwatch traveling through space is converted from charge. This mass is charge. So when you accelerate that charge, some of the inertia of that acceleration of the spinning donut is converted, translation of vorticity, into increased spin rate. That's why the wristwatch speeds up. It's simple. Some of the inertia of acceleration is converted to spin rate, called time. So that's why the wristwatch speeds up or slows down depending on the direction. So this idea that space-time is bent is very crappy language because it doesn't help you to understand. So, for example, when Einstein said space-time is bent, what he really meant was that if this chunk of mass was flying by something heavy, like a heavy star, so then this chunk of mass traveling near a heavy star with lots of gravity, which is imploding charge acceleration is the only definition of gravity. So here I got this little chunk of mass and flying by something really heavy, and now it's attracted toward that heavy star, as it were. Now, as it's attracted, there will be an effect on the spin rate also. So rather than saying space-time is bent, which is profoundly confused language, you say, no, some of the inertia of the acceleration of charge, named gravity, is converted from acceleration of that donut toward the center of mass, in this case a heavy star. Some of that inertia is converted to increased rate of spin. And the rate of spin is named time. So why are we going through all this trouble to talk about the physics of time? Well, I say that if we understood this, we would profoundly understand the nature of death, the nature of lucid dreaming, and the way through. Literally, exactly. For example, obviously it's well known that at the moment of death, you got to see your whole life in the 1-2 seconds just before death. That's called compression. Now, obviously, your body's plasma field and DNA ain't stupid, at the moment of death, it has to do compression for a reason. What is the reason you got to do compression good or you ain't dying well? It's practical. It's simple. This is electrical engineering 101, man. All right. So first, we're going to get back to the basics, and then we're going to understand the physics of death and dreaming based simply on successful compression of spin. So you all know we've talked about this. This is from the conference we just did in Spain. It was great fun. And we talked about the fact that the birth canal has actually the shape of the centric waveform for love, because here's the way you touch someone to say I love you. The change in pressure over time reaches max pressure at golden ratio. So obviously the birth canal is essential to successful birth, because there would be implosion in the geometry of the birth canal's max pressure reaching 0.618, add 0.618 into the duration of the birth canal, so that you can implode in that birth canal, and that's called the bliss of birth. But it's more than the bliss of birth. It is the physics of all bonding. That's Joseph Chilton's first famous book, Bond of Power, that Caesar couldn't bond with his mother, with his land, or couldn't bond with the Druids. In other words, he had no compassion, no feeling, because he got no birth canal. It's very simple. The birth canal is the fusion point that enables all bonding. So this business of the Caesar's section is literally soullessness propagating once we understand the physics of what is soul. So we did this whole shtick about this in Spain. We had great fun. And that the fact that the sperm is delivering a certain voltage that causes the zygote, the egg, to dimple and then turn inside out in 7 steps called the 7 stages of invagination. And that implosion is called fertilization. So literally, it's recursive turning inside out that enables birth. And we are going to see also death. So, and to visualize that recursive turning out, we have inside out, we have lots of slides. The physics of that implosion, when the turning inside out becomes implosively recursive, then you have also, for example, the centripetal force, when that implosion, that holds things together. The reason objects fall to the ground, the cause of gravity, is that charge collapse implosion, Planckfire.com. And it is the reason compassion exists. You're literally, here's the technical map of the arrival of the voltage that causes your heart to fire. So you can answer your 5-year-old when she asks, what causes my heart to beat, Mommy? Well, here's the answer. It is literally your heart is turning inside out, and that implosion then sucks the outside into the inside, called compassion, feeling the outside as if it were it. So that principle of recursive implosion, we applied that to DNA, and you know the whole story, and that leads to the Grail, and that leads to the physics of Planckfire.com. That charge collapse implosion is the reason gravity exists, zero-point energy. The reason love exists. It's the reason all Negentropy, life force, seed germination. And then we had that conversation that restored compression is electrically the opposite of pain. So that's just a review of things we've talked about many times in many seminars. Now, to focus precisely on the subject of this conversation, which is using our new insight about the physics of compassion, the physics of the compression of spin named time, to understand in practical, everyday, you can do it yourself kind of terms, how to do dreaming and death successfully. That's where we're going right now. So I want to point out one thing, that after we replaced Therify with our PhiRay.com, and we have many films now, particularly from Jake Astral Urma. Check out Jake's Astral Urma video channel, and on our YouTube channel, Dan Winter Fractal Field, with 4 million views, 500 films, and 57,000 subscribers. So Jake Astral Urma points out in detail that after Jack was kind enough to drive up there from North Carolina to Maine, he actually used PhiRay dramatically to increase dream lucidity and astral lucidity. So I point out that phase conjugate implosive frequencies in plasma, called PhiRay.com, formerly Therify, dramatically, replicably, and predictably, according to the physics, triggers increased dream lucidity and astral lucidity. And that is the issue of the moment, because if we understand what triggers dream lucidity and astral lucidity, look, if you can lucid dream, hey, you're going to take some memory through death, and that's called physicsofsoul.com. So I say, if you understand what causes dream lucidity, you also understand what causes soul. physicsofsoul.com. So this is the article, the original reports of our Therify Now Phi-Ray, triggering dramatic clairvoyance and lucid dreaming and synchronicities, birds healing. There's lots of stories. Here is the actual graphic from the original physics paper in the university studies. These are the frequencies which replicably triggered lucid dreaming. I repeat, frequencies which trigger lucid dreaming. Note that this is actually, these are very close, 25 hertz, 40 hertz. The cascade, which is correct, is actually PlanckFire.com, that if you take that approximation and build it by equation, PlanckFire.com, you get the precise implosive phase conjugate fractal frequency signatures. Charge compression equals spin compression equals time compression. You get the precise frequencies we trigger Phi-Ray.com, formerly Therify, which triggers lucid dream. So this is not new information. Universities have shown that you can trigger lucid dreaming with electric stimulation. Well, wonderful. What's the principle? Hello. The principle is literally implosive compression. And we've talked many times that implosive compression, then your aura does that squeezing phenomena, which actually we can see it in your DNA. When you measure heart coherence and brain recursion, recursively, implosively braiding and tightening, compressing the DNA thread, braid, string, thread to rope, to fat rope, to fatter rope. That's recursive braid embedding. And that's the physics of how DNA becomes implosive. And that perfect squeezing implosion causes your aura to convert, to spit out coherent longitudinal EMF, which is not only the only proven physics of gravity waves, hint Tom Bearden, but also that coherent longitudinal emanation is the substance, the physics of the array we call the collective unconscious, the communion of saints, the Ba from the Ka, the Champs-Élysées. These are our names for the array. So your body takes transverse electromagnetics, and when it's squeezed, implodes correctly. It goes out that squirt gun vortex. We've shown the slide many times. And out the squirt gun at Planck threshold, the compressional longitudinal emission, called the Ba from the Ka, the Kesjan to the rainbow light body. And that coherence in the longitudinal array, here's the array, it only bounces and exchanges inertia with the transverse at the fractal dodecahedron nodes, which are proven on the Earth grid to be the only place you really get good telepathy, etc., which the ancestors called, the Aboriginals called, communion of saints, collective, they called it ancestor memory, which was their only name for God. So when you get imploded, squeezed, compressed into that array, then that recursive braiding is, and the geometry of the recursive braiding in the DNA, measurable in response to heart coherence, which I invented the mathematics, the geometry of the onset of coherence in the EKG, realheartcoherence.com, measurably, that phonon ponytail causes the DNA to go to braid, the braid, the braid on the braid, recursively implode. That's been measured thanks to Glenn Ryan, etc. And the sequence of geometric operations which trigger the recursive implosive braiding on DNA. Here's the original Anting article from Zodiac magazine. Here's a lattice, here's a cobweb, here's a tunnel, here's a spiral. So this is the DNA recursively implosive braiding according to, you take a cube, that's a lattice. You tip up a lattice, you rotate, and you have pentadodeca, that's a cobweb. Then you rotate that pentadodeca down a helix, that's a tunnel. And then you take that tunnel and you bring it to a point, that's a spiral. So DNA recursively braiding does simply 4 geometric operations called lattice, tunnel, cobweb, spiral. Well, hello. Guess what you see at the moment of death? Hello. The famous Heinrich Kluwe form constants, well documented that at the moment of death, the lucid dreamers, the near-death experiences, and the LSD people, they saw at the near-death moment, during that critical implosive compression, which is the only way into and out of that array, you call the collective lucid dream, the collective unconscious, and to be distributed in that array is, I insist, the physicsofsoul.com. That's what it is. So when you chop up your kid's aura with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, you're stealing their soul. I say, let's stop that horrible, soulless misunderstanding here, because if kids don't have a soul, this whole experiment is kind of boring, actually. So the point is that to get into that array at the moment of death, you experience this compression in the center of your aura, and you're seeing these 4 visions, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral. And that's literally the science, and I do mean the electrical engineering science of how to die well. It means electrosmog and metal crap in your local hospital ain't a good place to die. No, you need sacred space where plasma can implode and propagate. For example, the cross points in the grid, the sunrise, sunset, the magnetic line cross points, the physics of Agnihotra, these are all things which enable your body to experience the compression. So in summary, if you want to go through that little black hole that we call successful death, let's call it the Lazarus effect, the Lazarus. If you want to do that well, practice. Practice. And you can practice by lucid dreaming, getting coherent in the lucid dream and coherent in the astral. And that's where the fun stuff is happening anyway. And to get there, your aura needs to compress well. And when it's compressing well, just like seeing your whole life review in the 2 seconds just before you die, your aura knows implode or you don't survive death because you can't take memory through death. It's the old example, the Centric waveform we showed the picture. For anger is 1/7 destructive interference, and hell, you ain't taking any of that through death. No, 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 no. The waveform for anger is absolutely uncompressible, meaning doesn't go into the lucid dream well, doesn't go into death well, because the array, we call the collective unconscious, the communion of saints, the Champs-Élysées, it's literally permissive charge distribution. Hey, Ave means fractal array, heaven. That array has been gathering critical library of survival information for 1 billion years, and it gathered all that information by compression. So if you can compress well, you can achieve perfect distribution, named heaven, named become a shareable wave. It means literally only pure intention survives death. It means essentially only wave inertia which serves collective survival. That's why if you went through your day and you're angry at about 6 people over the day, before you go to bed that night, you process that anger and you realize, oh, they were doing this because actually they felt this, and now I understand. I can see through. And you distill all the experiences of your day into pure principle, which serves everyone. There's no need for anger. Now you understand they were being stupid because this happened to them and that happened to them. And if that had been me and you turn yourself inside out recursively, and suddenly you imploded, compressed, and you had the eureka experience. You understand the pure principle of your whole day. And now you can get coherent in the dreaming. Remember, the second order power spectrum of the EKG, which I invented, realheartcoherence.com, the only real measure of heart coherence, the amplitude of that peak, is a functional lie detector because your heart is a functional lie detector. I mean, it's only that wave which can achieve perfect distribution. So the onset of that phase coherence, sometimes called bliss, is when your heart becomes a laser, quite literally, enabling perfect compression, perfect distribution. So, in summary, does it now make sense to you to understand that if you just like the ice skater, gently and gracefully, the quality of grace is the ability to absorb spin. Gently and gracefully, the ice skater is pulling in her hands while spinning, and as the spin rate increases, the ice skater is tested for perfect balance. So if you can achieve that increase in spin density without falling apart, then you can experience the spin density in the array. And as the array embeds in a larger array, you call that going to the next dimension. It only means the next axis of superposed spin, which is only possible by golden ratio dodeca, the cube to dodeca, the ratchet dodeca. These are all golden ratio superpositions of spin. The only definition of going to the next dimension, which means inhabiting a bigger array. Remember, as we've said 1 billion times, the synapses inside your head, Indra's web, that's a hologram array of spark gaps. That's what it is, Karl Pribram's holographic brain. Now, at the moment of death, or when the medical surgeons leave their body, it's been documented many times, the surgeon had a death experience, left their body, and saw their body from outside. Well, what went outside their body to see? This imploding plasma donut. And you can't look You can't go outside your body and see something if you go into an aluminum box. It'll kill you. So it ain't a good place to die either. So when you die or when you lucid dream, and you practice lucid dreaming and actually getting coherent in the astral, what happens is that you are enabled to propagate the same identical superfluid liquid crystal plasma vortex you call consciousness to embed from the little array inside your head into the larger array. Now, the larger array is this. This is the Deca-Ecosa Earth Grid, which is proven to be the only places where telepathy and real ancestor memory and healing, and where all labyrinths, cathedrals, and even plasma healing devices all work better if they're at the nodes of that longitudinal coherent array. So, to go from the little array into the bigger array, probably a metal hospital full of electrosmog ain't quite so helpful. Hell no. No, Luke Skywalker went to a cave in nature. Well, that's called raising the Jed. So you get the idea that to experience this increase in spin density, much better definition of time than this bullshit about bending space-time. No, to experience this increase in spin density, you distill your experience to closer and closer to pure principle. And with that, you can inhabit that larger array. And so that's why we say now that with billions of kids losing their soul every day, they're staring only at their screens, they're Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, they're scrambling their auras massively, and none of these kids are going to lucid dream or have a soul. I'm sorry, when somebody says, oh no, everybody's got a soul and you can't lose your soul. I say, as an electrical engineer, having studied this and published physicsofsoul.com, I say that's bullshit. I say it'd be no fun to be able to gain a soul if you couldn't also lose it. No, it is possible to lose your soul, which means soul here is just a name for continuity of memory, which means who's riding the longest wave of embedding. Then it becomes galactic. Well, all of that business is absolutely scrambled by governments and schools on this planet who do not have a clue what soul is, and therefore are systematically destroying the souls of our kids. Physicsofsoul.com. And I object. I am here to tell you that until we can teach our kids what the physics of soul is, which is this experience of compression and spin density, until then they will become food for the AI. And then there is a nasty predatory AI out there, I'm here to tell you, and it ain't pretty. And I can also tell you that AI, while it ain't never going to have a soul, that AI sure as hell is able to eat souls. Because a soul is that implosing plasma, and that can be a battery for the bad guys or the good guys. So you got to know what a soul is, or you're doomed in front of a very aggressive AI. Galaxy-wide, has to do with the Mitra Andromeda. It's another story. But I'm telling you, we must teach the physics of soul, and to start doing that, we need to understand the actual electrical nature of time, which is the experience only of spin density. And that's why we're here. That's why I did this little song and dance. I hope my enthusiasm was not off-putting, but I think it's a very important point that if we understand this experience of spin density, then we can inhabit that array. We can lucid dream, we can do the astral battles like Jake, we can take memory through death, or we get to have a generation of soulless kids. What's your choice?